You have already learned what batch gradient descent is. With batch gradient descent, you take all the training samples and feed them forward. The cost is calculated, and the backpropagation changes the weights and biases based on the average over all training samples. This process is repeated until the network is trained well enough. Look at this diagram. This is the cost function for a network with a single weight. Let's say we start at a certain cost at the red dot. We have already seen that the derivative of the cost function tells us in what direction the weight should move to minimize the cost. With batch gradient descent, all the training samples are processed and used to move in the right direction. This results in a relatively smooth line that will follow the curve of the cost function to the lowest point. But batch gradient descent comes with two problems. 1. Since all the training points need to be kept in memory before adjusting the weight, you need a lot of memory. 2. The adjustments to the weight are so subtle the network can get stuck in what is called a local minimum. In that case, the network might perform okay, but it should be able to be trained better. What can we do about this? Let's have a look at an alternative of batch gradient descent: stochastic gradient descent. With stochastic gradient descent, weights and biases are adjusted after each training sample. This results in much more radical changes to weights and biases. Look at the green point. It is an anomaly in the dataset with an extreme value. This can increase the cost very much. If this happens to be the last training sample, it might have a bad impact on the training. But in reality, stochastic gradient descent is fast and in many cases will get the job done. So which one do we choose? Batch gradient descent or stochastic gradient descent? Let's look at the challenge ahead. The training set we will use for the handwritten numbers contains 20,000 samples. Each sample is a picture of 28 by 28 pixels. To calculate one neuron in the hidden layer, 15 million calculations have to be made, and everything needs to be stored in memory. Add a few neurons and it will bring any regular computer to a halt. Batch gradient descent is not suitable for large amounts of data and might lead to getting stuck in local minimums. Stochastic gradient descent is fast, but is more vulnerable to anomalies in the data. The solution? Mini-batch gradient descent. How does that work? Step 1. Shuffle the dataset. Step 2. Divide the shuffled training set in batches. Process a batch and update the weights and biases. Repeat until all batches are processed. How do we prepare our training set for mini-batch gradient descent? The first thing we need is the training and test data. Here you see the official website that has the database. The database is made available under Creative Commons terms and users are encouraged to make copies of the files. Here you see those files. There are 4 gzipped files with 60,000 training samples and 10,000 test samples. The image data and labels are stored in separate files. For our purposes, we really do not need 70,000 samples. So I did the following. I converted all files to 2 comma-separated files. The training set has 20,000 samples and the test set contains 1,000 samples. A single sample looks like this. The first number is the target digit, or the label as they call it. I added one hot encoding to the data. For this we need 10 extra numbers. The rest of the numbers is the image pixel data. As you can see, they are numbers between 0 and 1. Let's create a script that can read and show this data. I copied the CSV files to the project. Now I create a script that reads the training data. At this point, the complete file is in memory and split on new lines. I shuffle the data. Now I loop through the text lines, and whenever the batch size is reached, I yield a batch. Let's test if I can retrieve a batch. You see, there are 10 batches of 2000 samples each. Let's see what's in the data. I'll print the first sample of each batch. Those are a lot of numbers. Let's render them with ASCII characters. Since I am not using any library, I will plot a number in text mode. I will just paste the code to do this. What does this code do? Watch this. We see the first digit of each batch printed with ASCII characters. So now we have batched training data. We also need to retrieve the test data. For this, I will write a function that is similar to the getTrainingSamples function. There is no need to shuffle or batch the data. I will just parse the cells and return all test data. Let's print the first 10 test samples. Very nice. We have prepared the data. We can retrieve batched training samples and a list of all the test samples. And we are able to print the numbers in the console. You can see that the handwritten numbers will be quite a challenge to recognize. How will our network do? You will see that in the next and final part of this training.